Coming up next on Nevada Week in Review, we'll have a preview of Governor Sandoval's State of the State address. We'll find out how the governor got rebuffed by Senator Reid. And we'll have the latest on yet another sports arena proposal. That's all coming up next on Nevada Week in Review. Welcome to Nevada Week in Review. Before I begin, I'd like to introduce the media panel. Laura Myers covers politics for the Las Vegas Review-Journal. Kevin Bolinger is an anchor reporter for Fox 5 News. Rikki Cheese is a reporter for Channel 13 Action News. And Jonathan Humbert is a member of the 8 News Now I-Team. We want to talk about the state of the state and what Governor Sandoval will be proposing. First, we got some really bad news. These unemployment figures are just dismal. Local joblessness jumped to a record 14.9%. A jump from 14.3% in November. There was kind of like some good news towards the end of the year, and this came out, and this sort of serves as the backdrop to what Governor Sandoval will be proposing on Monday, on the 24th. How does this all figure in? I mean, he has made the case that for sure now he can't raise taxes on anybody because it'll just add to the joblessness. So how do you think that figures in?
I think that it's going to play a major factor, not only in his State of the State address, but maybe how aggressively the talks begin with the legislature, because we keep talking about the creation of new jobs as being the key to the recovery to the economy. They've got to come up with some ideas to do that, and they've got to find the money to do that, and the taxes with the small business is going to be obviously something that is talked about a lot. So I think that those are going to be the center of the conversation on Monday. That's going to be the starting point that we're going to see over the 4 months of the session.
If you have these unemployment figures continue the way they are, the business community is going to use this as leverage and jam it down the throat of every one of those legislators in Carson City, because they're going to look at that and say, you can't touch our payroll tax, you can't affect any of the small incremental fees or anything at all. That they're going to say that if we do that, we're not going to be able to hire people. So I would expect those numbers to be first and foremost on all of the business lobbyists' minds, to say, look at these numbers. We raise a single dime, these folks are not going to have any money at all to stay open, let alone hire people to try to turn some of that around.
You know, Pete Ernott, he's kind of an insider, you know, R&R partners, but he's known Governor Sandoval. Anointed
governor, if you will.
Well, you could say that. But he's known him. I guess they went to school at UNR. I mean, they've been best friends, and Pete Ernott played a significant role in Governor Sandoval's campaign. And if anybody should know how the governor thinks about a certain issue, it probably would be Pete Ernott. And then basically he says that the state's education system's biggest problem is that teachers that aren't good can't be fired, or they can't be removed or penalized. He thinks that the state should consider consolidating 16 school districts, maybe into one, or I don't know what he's got in mind. And then the Clark County School District should use construction money to pay for operating expenses. I mean, this is really what Sandoval has been saying all along. So it's kind of like, are we convinced that Brian Sandoval is a conservative, and the people that he has surrounded himself with really do believe it?
I think there's no doubt about that, but the problem here is going to be, that's all really good to talk about, but a lot of these funds that they're talking about redistributing or moving around can't be touched. I mean, this is legislation. It's not like you can just go and dip into some of these funds. You can't just take the school construction money and use it for something else. So that's all good talk. It really doesn't take into account the actual dollars that are needed right now and where those dollars are actually going to come from, what can be accessed immediately. So some of his suggestions, they sound really good, but they can't happen.
One of the things, go ahead, Laura.
Well, on the funds issue, you're right, in theory. But what happened is during the special session last time, I think the state took $62 million from some sort of water fund, and a judge ruled that it's okay because the state can cannibalize anything it wants, which was sort of surprising. But maybe there's some precedent.
But didn't the voters approve this thinking that it would go to construction of schools? Now, that right now because the growth isn't there. So isn't that where the problem is? I mean, I'm not a lawyer.
Well, but at least it's money to be had. That I think one of the things that I want to see on Monday when we talk about the budget with the governor is to say, all right, how much are you factoring in, asking them to voluntarily come to the table and give up concessions and change their collective bargaining? We talked about that constantly with the governor when he was a candidate, to say you're really anticipating them to come forward and save hundreds of millions of dollars and offer that to you and say, yeah, we'll give it up voluntarily. Not a problem, Governor Sandoval. And he has every faith and belief that that's going to happen. So I want to really hone in on that over the next couple weeks to say, how much of this magical moon money are you really talking about here? How much of it is serious and possible? Because the NSEA and the other folks in education are not willing to give up things that they've been given of their own volition. It has to be taken. And whether Sandoval is ready for that task, to die on that hill, to go after these educators when he's already going to be cutting dentures and diapers for everyone else, can he really take on everybody and then smile and grin his way through it? That's what I want to watch for.
Let me ask you this. Do you think, and I'll ask you, John, this, you're probably the only one that would go out on a limb and actually predict this, and that is, do you think that the teachers union and those organizations that represent school district employees, because they, quote, have the discretion as opposed to state employees, it's really up to the school boards and what they negotiate with the employees, do you think the unions would rather have layoffs than a 5% salary cut?
Wow. I mean, I think that they're going to have to make some sort of bargain like that, but I think it's going to be something on the back end. They're going to have to sweeten the pot for these guys because, again, across-the-board cuts are something that I don't think a lot of Democratic lawmakers are going to propose at all. They haven't liked it in 07, haven't liked it in 09. They're just not going to go down that road, so I don't know if that proposal's going to be there. But if they want to do some sort of compromise, a 2, a 3%, they're going to have to sweeten it with something else to make those teachers be able to do it, because you can't really tell a starting teacher making $38,000 or less, hey, you've got to take another 5% cut, because that's already happening right now for state workers who work at the libraries at UNLV, for example. Those folks are having to take a lot of money cuts, and they don't make a whole lot. So I really watch out for that, but they got to sweeten the pot if they want to get those teachers involved.
One thing that Ernst said was that, yeah, there could be a 20% cut for the university system, and the cuts would hurt professors, but basically they should remember they got generous contracts for 20 years, and they should be glad for the generosity of the state budgeting system for the past 20 years. But I'm wondering about the professors that got hired last year, or maybe they haven't been around for 20 years and they haven't been the beneficiaries of some of those increases. But that's probably a whole nother issue. I did want to ask you about this notion about Brian Sandoval first going to Senator Reid. I think it was even before he got sworn in.
November.
And he went and said, Senator Reid, could you help me? I've got some Medicaid cases here that aren't totally paid for, and I got some unemployment benefits that we need to pay for. Could the federal government help?
That's right. He went and he asked for it. In fact, the problem here in Nevada is similar to a lot of other states. And you've got a lot of Republican governors who are like Brian Sandoval. They made promises to balance the budget, not raise taxes, yet they have problems with Medicaid funding, unemployment money that they're giving out, and so they need help. And basically, Senator Reid said, gee, I'd love to help you, but the stimulus money's gone. You're on your own. Go figure it out. So, you know, he's letting Brian Sandoval try to figure it out himself without any federal help.
And Lauren, your story, you actually said that Reid suggested that Sandoval should reconsider his campaign pledge not to raise taxes.
That's right. Yeah. It's basically, he said, look, you bought this boat, you go and sail it. You know, I'm not going to help you.
And he was pretty adamant about that. He said he's going to have to, what did he say, do the right thing and step back and change your mind about it and really put him on notice that he's now responsible to turn this boat around.
And Reid subtly made the reference that if Sandoval really wants these cuts, he would love to give it to him, but he's not going to get support from the Republicans in Congress. So he basically sent the message to those Republican governors to go to their senators and Congress people and say, you know what? Republicans, if Reid's going to do it, let's get the bipartisan support to help out the state. I mean, that was a little tweak there that was done very subtly, but I think that that's something that'll be interesting to see how it plays out when the subject comes up on Capitol Hill, how much influence these Republican governors can now have on some of these longtime people in Congress to see if they can make any movement to help out the state or not. And maybe that was a little bit of a power play that Senator Reid was doing.
And the interesting thing is the political climate right now now is that you have Republicans battling against each other for ideology, because if these Republican governors are coming to Capitol Hill with hat in hand and up and asking for money, you have the Republicans in the House who've already voted for an earmark ban. So they don't want to give out any money. So you have Republicans asking for money and Republicans also saying you're not going to get any money regardless of your party. So there's an ideological struggle there that really kind of shows how much of it is puffery, how much of these people are really standing by what they say. Because if you have the Tea Party influence, a large part of that earmark ban, the governors who were swept into office with a little bit of that, now they're playing both sides.
Senator Raggio has made it a point of stating that a plan to go to local governments and give them more home rule, ergo the power and authority to raise taxes. How is that any different from raising taxes on a state level? So my question is, if Sandoval is willing to go to the federal government to get revenue and he's willing to go to local government to get revenue, even at the expense of seeing local taxes going up, how is that different from going to state government and going ahead and getting the same sort of plan in place? You're nodding.
It's not happening on his watch. I mean, it's a way for him to get around, as we saw former Governor Gibbons do. It's a way for him to get around his no taxes stance. It's a way for him to shift the responsibility to other agencies. You folks go out, you make your folks mad, but I get to stand firm on no new taxes, but still get the benefit of getting these extra revenues in another way, and I've kept my promise.
And you increase pressure on local governments to get firmer with the unions, to get firmer, you know, because tell you the truth, the unions are, of course, they're very strong here for many years. And I think the political landscape is shifted on them a little bit. Like I think you're going to talk about it, these firefighter salaries. You know, you start to, I want to say, demonize or make these public employees enemy number one, and it's a political game. You know, you highlight the fact that a lot of them are making huge salaries, and it makes the public angry.
We are going to talk about that in a moment. Before we do, I did want to talk about this arena that was proposed by an institution that is going to experience 20% reduction in state subsidies to higher education. But they have this proposal, UNLV has this proposal to build a 40,000, that's enormous, a 40,000 seat stadium and entertainment complex somewhere, I think, around McCarran Airport, although Randy Walker has stated that there's no land down there that they could even pave, much less build a stadium on. So what do you make of this?
Well, the one thing is UNLV is not coming out and giving a lot of details yet. They say they're going to do that in the next several days, but they were approached by a couple of people, the president of the Silverton, as well as somebody down who was behind the Staples Center development, who's also part owner of the Lakers and the LA Kings, about doing this. And it's a three-tier proposal to build that 40,000 seat domed football stadium that could also house, of course, the National Finals Rodeo and concerts and some other things, and then also give a facelift to the Thomas and Mack Center, which is 25 years old, and then put in an entertainment complex all on campus. Now, the question that has not been answered yet, because UNLV has not come forward, is who's going to pay for this? They called it in Neil Smatras, the president of UNLV's email, a public-private partnership, but didn't go any further. Is the public part of it just the land part to do it on the UNLV campus, and is it private money, or is it not? I think Neil Smatras is a very smart guy. He's not going to let something like that leak out 2 weeks before a legislative session starts, where the higher education budget is going to get hammered, because that would lose a lot of their credibility in terms of lobbying up in Carson City. So my guess is we'll get some answers, but it's something that people have been crying for. They think they can generate the revenue that will be a long-term solution maybe to some of these budget problems by bringing in these, and UNLV getting a piece of the pie with the stuff that comes in. The question is, how's it going to get built? Where's it going to get built, and who's going to pay for it?
And especially when the legislature has got to tackle the other two, the big fight between Caesars Entertainment and MGM Resorts International, their competing arena proposals, which have to be settled within the first 40 days.
Well, and as I understand the Caesars Entertainment proposal, if the legislature doesn't act on it, or if they do act on it and the governor goes ahead and vetoes it, it's still going on the ballot. They got the signatures. Right. It's a go. So politically speaking, it seems like that is the most advanced proposal out there. Of course, we got the Cordish proposal that Mayor Oscar Goodman has been proposing for downtown, but you're exactly right. there's a lot of competition surrounding the Caesars Entertainment proposal.
And you've got these private companies as opposed to this public entity, which really needs the money. So if the lawmakers have to make a decision, doesn't it make more sense to prop up UNLV if this is a doable thing that's not going to cost taxpayer dollars, as opposed to these other proposals that not cost taxpayer dollars, depending on how this all shakes out. So the timing of this is amazing in many ways, and it really focuses immediately the legislature on higher education in a different way.
And one of the things, too, that will go into any of these arena deals that people are talking about is the discussions with UNLV. If it's not on campus, because they're going to be pulling away attractions at the Thomas and Mack that raises money for them. And so I know that in one of the proposals, when they were talking about putting aside at the Wet and Wild area on the Strip, they were going to subsidize UNLV somehow for the lost venues, that they were going to get the lost things at the Thomas and Mack. But whether you're for the arena proposal or not, this is a big political bargaining chip in a lot of races, not just in Carson City. This is going to be something that's key in the mayor's race, and city council races, and county commission races as well, because it has a lot to do with taxes, and if it goes to a public vote, it's going to be something that's going to be discussed and probably hotly contested over the next probably year or two before anything breaks ground.
And again, it's highly unlikely, isn't it, for an arena of this size, of this magnitude, to be built without public subsidies? It would almost seems like the Caesars proposal, because they do have this, I think it's a 0.9% increase in the sales tax in a very limited area, this gaming enterprise district, which is practically 95% tourists. You may be against it because it's a tax increase, and Brian Sandoval said he would veto it. But isn't that the most realistic, knowing that in other cities they needed that subsidy?
Mitch, I guess I look at it this way. Do you have your club seats right now for that arena? Because it was built last year in 2010.
I actually have comps for all the guests tonight.
Okay, because what I know is that at Flamingo and Koval, there's an empty lot that was promised to be built over 2 years ago, and not a thing has been done on that. I don't even think that there's been a traffic study done on that area at this point.
I think there has been a traffic study. I think there has been.
I would have loved to have seen it, because I asked for it from day one from AEG and got nothing. So I think now for things to change and to look at it this way, public-private may be the way to go, because as we've seen, the private companies cannot get their act together and cannot get their ducks in a row, because that was supposed to have been built, and we heard the crowing and the promising that anything that AEG announces is built, and we were already supposed to have been in there by now with season tickets to whoever would be playing.
I'm still working on that.
Okay.
And remember, too, that in terms of, say, a big stadium on a UNLV campus, there's the NCAA has almost become, you know, with a lot of professional ties in a way, the renovated basketball arena on the University of Washington campus, Heck Edmondson Pavilion, is now the Alaska Airlines Center. So you're tying into naming rights, and in a city like Las Vegas, and when you're crossing over between collegiate athletics as well as pro sports maybe being in there, and concerts and boxing, there's a big price tag for that they can go after with any of these arenas. The naming rights are going to factor into something where they can recoup some of that money.
We talked about earlier in the program, we talked about Senator Raggio and the budget, and a replacement for Senator Raggio was named this week, and I happened to see him in Las Vegas the other day, so he's definitely making the rounds. His name is Greg Brower. I think he went to high school here in Las Vegas, Bonanza, if I'm not mistaken, but he's definitely hailing from Reno these days, and he got the appointment by the Washoe County Commission to replace the lion, the legend of the state legislature, Bill Raggio. And the first thing that he said was,
I'm not going to raise your taxes. That's right.
And that didn't take the wind out of the sails of those folks that were hoping that there might be some fudge room, some flexibility on the Republican caucus to move them towards 2/3 approval for a tax increase.
Well, I think so. I mean, you know, he said it for a reason, because he thought that's what the county commission wanted to hear. I think afterwards, Senator Raggio said, well, he might not mean it in the end, but you know, if you say that and you get appointed because you said that, you better stick to it.
He did say it. I mean, that subject came up. He's on record.
And other people were fuzzier and trying not to get penned down, and he went out and said it. So, I mean, you can change your mind. But I think it's tough to do in this atmosphere.
It's kind of interesting that people like Greg Brower and other people that the governor has surrounded himself with, like Dale Urquiagua and Peter, not to a certain extent, Terry Jamison, the former president of the school board, there were some indications that perhaps that he might moderate some of his positions that he articulated during the campaign, but it certainly doesn't look like that's happening, does it?
Well, I think there still might be, for the folks on the left, there still might be hope if that's what they really want, because this isn't a guy who's going to throw bombs. This isn't a guy who's going to stand out there and make proclamations as Gibbons did. He's not going to, you know, hold a fusion center against their head and demand that he gets $90,000 for that, or nothing's going to happen. So there might be some movement on that, but that's going to be one of those really defining moments for Brian Sandoval, that if he sticks to his guns, I think a lot of the nice guy persona to go away, because you know that Oseguera and Horsford are not going to play nice with this stuff. Horsford has already shown his teeth a number of times, bashing the gaming community on the floor during the special session, really showing some anger at that. So if you pit Horsford against Sandoval's got to come back eventually and hit him hard. So I want to see how that shakes out.
Should be interesting to watch. I do want to talk about the firefighters, because Clark County Commissioner Steve Sisolak is basically calling for a criminal investigation into allegations that firefighters have abused sick leave. I guess the scenario is in which one firefighter will call in sick so a colleague can fill in and get overtime pay, and then sometimes they call in sick at the last minute so a colleague can receive callback pay, which is even better because it goes to their PERS retirement, right?
Exactly. And Sisolak, I talked to him today, he made it very clear. As far as he's concerned, I said, you know, RICO statutes, I mean, that's what you used to go after mobsters. He said, well, we're not accusing them of organized crime, but what he is saying is that if two people are involved, that makes it a conspiracy. And it takes two people to pull off these overtime callback scenarios. I mean, one guy's got to call the other guy and say, look, I'm going to call in sick so that way you can benefit, and so you've got two people involved. And he's basically sent letters just about everybody, including the FBI, saying, please come and get involved in this investigation. The DA, everybody get involved in this investigation. Now, the head of the union, Ryan Beeman, is saying, look, if this happened, and he's not denying that these two guys might have been involved in this, he's saying these are isolated incidents, and it's up to county managers, the fire chiefs themselves, to police these folks, and because there are policies in place. You're not supposed to call in but so many days. There are sanctions that could be put in place. But what Sisolak is saying is, and again, this is from the arbitrator's report that's cited by the county in the contract negotiations. What Sisolak is saying is that the incidents, this particular incident the arbitrator cited, is so egregious. Let's definitely take a look at these two firefighters, and then let's root around and see if other firefighters, to whatever degree, are involved in this, and if it takes this to shake it out. And he said today that he can't even begin to answer all of the emails and phone calls that he's gotten just over the past 24 hours since this all broke. So yes, as Laura said earlier, it isn't in a sense demonizing public employees, but when you do have almost 15% unemployment, and you've got folks who are, and we're just talking about the unemployment, these are the folks who are getting paid. We're not talking about the folks who have exhausted their benefits and can't get any more, so the number is probably far, far higher than 14.9. When you've got that kind of political atmosphere, and you hear a story about firefighters for whatever municipality making $200 and something thousand on one guy's base pay was like $52,000. Really? It's kind of hard for the firefighters to make the case that this is isolated to whatever degree. If it's happening in the department, Sisolak says this is something that's, you know, taking taxpayer dollars, and it needs to be stopped.
This is something George Knapp and I have been talking about for years when it comes to the firefighters. George proved many of these allegations earlier in the year and really brought this to the forefront of these issues to say that this isn't an isolated case. This is a policy unwritten that many of these people do. So you have that combined with what we found down in Laughlin over 2 years ago, that many of the older folks toward the end of their days go down to Laughlin, get extra special training over a couple days so they can do water rescues and high-rise rescues because of the taller buildings down there, and do a handful of calls. So they're literally padding their last few years, which goes into what they get for retirement, by doing little to nothing down in Laughlin. So you see this intentional move, and the chief at the time said, yeah, they have that authority. They're old enough to bid down there, to put their name in the kitty to get down there into Laughlin, and they do it, and that's not a problem. So we're paying people more to do less, and then paying them again when they retire. And these sorts of things, when you cobble together how much these these folks make in overtime. We asked the chief directly about it over 2 years ago to say, sir, what are you doing about this? Why not hire more people and bring those costs down? They said study after study after study has shown that this is the way to do it to save money. Well, now we know where some of that money is going from their own investigation.
And once again, in all fairness to the firefighters, keep in mind that these were contracts that were negotiated in better times. I mean, we're seeing that across the board. I mean, Oscar Goodman had the same problem with the city employees. Now, these were contracts negotiated in better times, and so the union members have said, look, we're not stealing this money. This language was put in our contracts. Your county managers, your city managers, you should hold them responsible. But these same managers are saying, well, look, yes, we made a mistake then because those were better times. Times are hard now. We need to renegotiate and bring it down to a more realistic level.
As Laura was saying, it's almost like they're the poster child for the public, because this average county firefighters averaged $180,000 in wages and benefits in 2009.
Yes, someone told me today that they know some firefighters that have been, I guess there are special license plates that you have, that they've been changing their license plates because they're getting jeers driving down the street.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's, you know, they're getting a lot of negative attention.
All right. On that note, we've got to go. That is all the time we've got left on this edition of Nevada Week in Review. I'd like to thank Rikki Cheese from Channel 13 Action News, Laura Myers from the RJ, Kevin Bolinger from Fox 5 News, and Jonathan Humbert from 8 News Now. And I'd like to thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.